Hello? Hello? Please, I know you can hear us. We are trapped here in the spaces between worlds. It is a wonderful yet terrifying place, and only our voices escape. You can help us. You can let us in before we go mad.
Abridged History of Cloning by Curtiss Christensen. It started as most discoveries do, with the simplest of forms. Single-celled organisms tend to reproduce in a method not dissimilar to modern cloning techniques. Cellular mitosis, simply put, is the splitting off of an identical being as a form of reproduction. This was the primary basis of our current scientific advancements. One scientist in particular was absolutely fascinated with this reproductive action. Myron Freeman watched the cells divide or bud into near-perfect duplicates and foresaw the potential for human evolution. While his predications did not lead to much in terms of human application, his research served to set the basis for future development within this field. Dr. Freeman examined the processes of amoebae and bacterium, scrutinizing their functionality with an unappreciated poignancy that, in his time, was considered to be the ramblings of a madman. He theorized that the duplication of single cells could be applied and broadened to encompass the entirety of a complex being. He, despite academic disdain, began experimentation upon higher biology. His initial work produced little more than amorphous corpses, triple-eared hares, and conjoined monkey twins. Each experiment into cloning drifted further from scientific methods. His curiosity became obsession. He moved on to human experimentation with financing from the federal government. The following record of Dr. Myron Freeman's work is purely based on rumor and should be taken as such. None of this record can be substantiated, is subject to controversy and conjecture, and none of Freeman's research at this time has been declassified. Myron allegedly began his experimentation on willing subjects. They signed release waivers that underlined the minimal risk of the proposed procedure. He attempted to clone vital human organs with little success. Many of the subjects died suspiciously shortly after their enrollment into the program under different causes, from obesity to substance abuse. Current autopsies of the corpses have proved that cancerous tumors in specific organs were the true culprit. One can assume that the affected organs were the product of attempted duplication. Speculation presumes that this experimentation was a failure. Sadly, Professor Myron Freeman died at the age of 89 before his research could come to fruition. The spiritual successor of his work was Dr. Gillian Mukunta, a professor at the Institute of Science in Ratcliffe, Pennsylvania. She was a pioneer of cloning. It was her hope to produce viable organs for medical application. Her focus was on fetal stem cells. It was a revolution in the sciences. Gillian's method, while fatal to the unborn life, proved to be an infallible procedure for transplantation. Waiting lists for replacement organs were cut in half, but the demand for cloned organs still far outweighed the available resources. Controversy over the use of stem cells contributed to the insufficient production. Mukunta required new livestock that would not generate as much backlash. She began work in gene splicing. hoping to grow human organs inside of live pigs. Her theories were promising but proved ineffective. She developed a mutagenic chemical serum that was injected into the fetal tissue growing within a pregnant sow. Nearly all of the piglets died at an early age. The organs turned to tumors that engulfed the rest of their internal viscera. The available technology had not yet caught up to meet her hypothesis. She was too far ahead of her time. Failure turned out to be profitable for Gillian, however. The United States government saw a potential military use for the serum. They developed an aerosolized version of the chemical and attached dispersal units to warheads. Terrorist cells, civil uprisings, trade disputes, all were quelled by the threat or deployment of these mutagenic weapons. The effects were devastating to entire nations. Anyone caught in the radius of the gas saw their bodies quickly succumb to the uncontrollable tissue growth. Other countries of the world condemned these missiles as a war crime and a breach of several treaties, but any opposition was met with the same response. Countermeasures proved useless, only spreading the contaminant further. All the major countries of the world convened in Geneva for a fifth time at an event now known as the Union of Earth. A treaty was signed stipulating the dismantling of the weapons. In exchange, the world was unified under a single global government, headed by the United States. A golden age of scientific and economic prosperity followed, and its effects can still be felt today, albeit in a greatly diminished form. The United States of the Earth Conciliatory, as it was called, drafted a new constitution to replace the outdated manuscript it had relied on for decades. This document forsook individual rights and freedoms, placing emphasis on the furthering of the greater good and man's inherent duty to community, state, and the earth. Dr. Gillian Makunta took her life soon after this. She died at the relatively young age of 54. Scholars speculate as to her reason, but none could imagine a satisfactory motive, given that her work had set the wheels in motion for the founding of the Earth Conciliatory. It was written off as a mental illness. Regardless of the mystery surrounding her death, she was given a hero's burial. Her statue still stands at the center of Conciliatory Square. Many tried to continue her research, but, without the aid of the banned serum, their attempts were doomed to failure. Frustrated by the lack of progress, the Earth Conciliatory poured funding into a collective think tank of top scientific minds from around the globe. Together, they reached a breakthrough. The team discovered a way to selectively edit any genetic information. The process involved using a bacteria's natural defense mechanism against viruses. This mechanism would learn the DNA patterns of an invading virus and cut the rogue genetic programming away. The scientists discovered that they could utilize this defense to alter DNA according to their whim, removing and adding anything they could properly map. Despite this forward momentum, the Earth Conciliatory was unimpressed with their findings. The think tank now worked with a fraction of their budget. Disputes broke out among their ranks. One side, headed by Dr. Fartham Bennington, wanted to proceed to aggressive animal testing, with the intent of moving on to human trials as soon as possible. The other side of the argument, led by Dr. Nakamura Tsukiko, cautioned against the dangers of pressing forward too quickly and sought to eliminate genetic disease. The combinations of these elements caused cracks to form in the metaphorical tank. The group disbanded. However, the United States decided to continue funding Bennington's contribution, as his ambitions were more in line with the new direction of Earth. Dr. Fartham's continued work was unorthodox. He seemed keener on creating genetic monsters than anything with an obvious practical application. However, his creatures did serve their ultimate purpose, Advancement of this particular field of scientific discovery increased exponentially. His creations went from amorphous blobs of flesh to astounding, purposeful predators. When Bennington had finished what he could on one of these things, he gifted them to his benefactors for disposal. Information regarding how the government dealt with the modified mutants is classified, but rumors abound. Some say they used them for testing new weapons, others that they simply incinerated them. But beyond those were the radical conspiracy theorists, who insisted that the government were using these monstrosities to put down rebellious elements. It was a time of great upheaval. Revolutionaries were vying for selfish independence from the world unity and peace. They were considered little more than failed, impotent terrorists. But it is feasible that the authorities saw them as a threat. All the rebellions met the same fate. They vanished under unknown circumstances. The most compelling mystery regards the disappearance of a group of anarchists heading to a habitable planet beyond our solar system in a homemade space vessel. They sought a place where they could live in debauchery, free from the moral restraint of society. They never arrived at their destination. No one knows whether the government was involved, but it is more likely that they died as a result of their own twisted philosophy, rather than being murdered by one of Bennington's beasts. Dr. Fartham Bennington, the father of modern genetics, died at the ripe old age of 91. Ironically, it was because of his work that Dr. Nakamura's dream was achieved. Genetic disease was eradicated, but this was only the beginning. The Earth Conciliatory would not be satisfied until disease, aging, and even death were just a footnote in the history of humanity's evolution. Thus began the age of machines. An unrelenting entrepreneur and brilliant engineer, Solomon Barclay, introduced his first line of robotic replacement limbs. He touted his discovery as the end of costly and fallible cloned organs, much to the chagrin of a Dr. Circum Ganem. Dr. Ganem had struggled to gain the attention of the federal government with his accelerated cloning procedures, and this movement toward robotics threatened his career. In a reactionary ploy, Circum strove to complete his magnum opus, the perfect human being. It was during this time that a great civil war broke out. Tensions had been mounting among the lesser components of the Earth Conciliatory. Their territories seceded from the Conciliatory, forming the Alliance of Free Nations, and claimed that their poverty and grievances had gone unheard by the United States. Much of the record of this conflict is lost, as the destruction was vast. All that we know is that the Earth Conciliatory defeated the Alliance. It was not a victory without change, however. The Earth Conciliatory reformed into the Greater Commune, ditching its previous name and mixed political system. They became what we know now. After the conflict, the fight between genetic and technological advancement continued. Solomon Barclay pushed his robotics forward with irrepressible drive, despite the fact that the government of the commune now owned his company. He developed mechanical replacement organs for every part of the human body. Dr. Ganem's research fell by the wayside, however, due to his relentless pursuit of a single, perfect human and his lack of progress. He was reduced to menial labor by the Greater Commune. They deemed machinery to be the wave of the future, and saw it as an easy way to cull the blight of human ailments. The commune regulated Barclay's replacements to meet economic standards, and issued them as the approved cure for any disease. It became common medical practice for emergency services to replace any infected or cancerous organ with a robotic replacement. Meanwhile, Circum continued his genetic experimentation in secret. The resultant creature appeared human, but it couldn't have been further. A being capable of shifting its own genetic code at will. Ganem sent his beastly assassin after those he believed had ruined his career. Politicians, industrialists, and former activists were grotesquely slain by the mutant. The Thing's final act was the assassination of Solomon Barclay. Ganem's deception was brought to light at the trial of Wire and Steel. An unintended truth was revealed, however. Barclay's robotics were poison to organic matter. Ganem was executed for the acts of his mutant abomination, but his lesson did not go unlearned. The governing body of the Greater Commune saw the flaws of mechanical men and opted to turn their interests back toward genetic perfection. One man in particular proved to be the key. Dr. Robert Marion was a eugenicist. He had been, until now, a relatively unrecognized genius. He was a maestro of the unborn, a prodigy when it came to suppressing the genes of potentially radical fetuses that would become unassimilated adults. This, however, was not what drew the commune's attention. What proved to be the most infatuating about his work was a little hobby of his. Marion had the habit of compiling data on favorable genetic attributes, and so the Greater Commune approached him with a task: discover the best DNA for humanity. With their framework in mind, he mapped the ideal genome for a perfect man. His duties as a prenatal genetic author were superseded by this task. He relentlessly pursued his version of God's image. At last he found the formula. He found the sequence for the ideal human. The first was simply known as 1, a conglomeration of African melanin and physique, Northern European mind, Asian social deference and industriousness, with a healthy mix of animal influence. This is obviously a simplification of the intricacies of the first clone, but it serves as an analogy of the traits Dr. Robert sought to emulate. It was not long before the act of breeding was outlawed by the commune. Natural procreation was replaced by cloning. The human race was now free from the complex dance of sexuality, free to fully commit as productive members of the commune. The working hours of citizens increased from an average of 30 hours a week to a much more appropriate 70 hours. Society flourished from increased necessities. The clones, being highly suited to leadership, were uplifted to rule over us. Their edicts kept us calm, controlled, and focused on pushing toward the betterment of the Greater Commune. Luxury and entertainment became a thing of the past. Those of us old enough to remember enjoying life surely longed for the old days, but we suffered in silence. After all, we were working towards something bigger than ourselves. Any opinions or work deemed unprogressive for society by our infallible clone rulers were quickly suppressed. Where before, diversity of thought and inevitable but amiable conflict were the driving factors of forward thinking, now unquestioning obedience to superior beings was the law of the land. Nothing changed, save for the slow and methodical chipping away of the very fabric of our being. All of our needs were provided for. Our lives had meaning beyond our individual existence. But we were slaves. Slaves to the state and the legion of growing clones that guided it. That was the end goal. We were to be replaced by the numbers. Conflict cannot exist in a world where all men think the same. No longer did Earth exist in perpetual war, petty disagreement, and selfish indulgence. Peace had been achieved, but at what cost? What did we lose along the way? When did humanity cease to be human? Immortality was within reach, but something was wrong. Every clone was the same. They had the same desires, the same interests, and were identical, being distinct only in their numerical naming. But these clones were not designed to be suited for labor. As the population of lesser humans faltered, the jobs they performed remained unfilled. As I write this, my death is assured, either by the hands of the clones or by the famine that encompasses our society. There are no more women, farmers, thinkers, laborers, or differences. I am the last of my kind. I am human. All that exists now are numbers. This has been The Abridged History of Clothing, written and recorded by Curtiss Christensen for AudioStories.com. Thanks for listening.